We want to make sure people know that their ability to vote and to vote freely and fairly and help to decide the outcome of elections is under threat. We've got to show the members of the state legislature that we, the people, mean business. And thanks to the Texas Democrats in that body, we were able to stop it momentarily. If we allow democracy to slip away through these voter suppression bills, then that will be on us.
The same Texas Democrats who blocked a Republican-backed voting restriction bill by staging a walkout last month are heading to Capitol Hill today, hoping to do what they do best, making the impossible seem possible in just the nick of time, and inject some life into the debate around the For the People Act, that federal voting overhaul bill struggling to get out of the gates in Congress. State Democrats plan to lobby senators along with Vice President Harris on Wednesday on behalf of the legislation ahead of a rally hosted by Beto O'Rourke in Austin this weekend. Efforts like these in Texas are becoming more widespread and more urgent. Washington Post in an editorial this morning writes this, quote, like termites, destructive but largely unseen, anti-democracy forces around the country are gnawing at the foundations of America's free and fair elections. It's bad enough that most Republicans continue to defend Trump's slander on American democracy and use it as a pretext to suppress the vote instead of looking for ways to appeal to more voters. It's even scarier that they're trying to write themselves an insurance policy so that if their vote suppression strategy fails in 2024, they can nonetheless reclaim power. Joining our conversation is Matt Dowd, political strategist and founder of Country Over Party, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post. Eugene Robinson's here. Claire, of course, is still here. Matt Dowd, you were at this rally this weekend. Talk about that.
I was actually at the rally this morning in Brenham, Texas, which is where Bluebell Ice Cream is founded. So, I went, and about 400 people turned out in this small town of every race, color, creed that you can imagine, all concerned about this. And one of the big concerns, obviously, is what the Republicans are doing. And the other concern is what the Democrats aren't doing in the midst of this as we have this. And to me, the voter restrictions are one aspect of this, but the most nefarious aspect of this, and I spoke at this before Beto did this morning, is it's basically, it's not only voter restrictions, it's an attempt at voter nullification. Many parts of these laws, including here in Texas, are about taking away the ability to certify an election and to inject partisans in the process of counting the votes. And that, to me, is the worst aspect of this. I was thinking, as in your lead up on the show today, about what's going to happen with Putin, what Biden's going to do and all of that. And I think that's great. And we obviously need to deal with Russia in the midst of this. But right here, right now, there are attempts to lose our democracy in our own country. Right now, there's attempts to roll back democracy in our own country today. And I think for anybody, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, to me, what is the right to vote and what is the ability to elect people? It's fundamentally our only aspect, our only tool that we have to hold elected officials accountable. And what they're doing, Republicans across the board, are devising attempts so they can't be held accountable for all the other stuff that they're doing on guns, on everything, on budgets, on taxes, on everything else they're doing. They don't want to be held accountable. And what way to do that is the only way that we can hold them accountable is our democracy.
You know, Eugene, it took everyone in the media too long to focus in on what Matthew Dowd is talking about. And I remember reading the Georgia law before it was signed, in that period between the bill being signed and Major League Baseball boycotting Atlanta and Georgia. And it's clear when you read it through that it's designed to make 2020 end differently. It's designed to take Raffensperger and Gabe Sterling out of the decision-making and put the Trump cronies in. A lot of these laws now have as a feature, not a bug, these sort of workarounds, the will of the voter. And I wonder if those require, and again, I am not putting this on Democrats because it's their fault. I'm putting it on Democrats because they're the only party interested in governing and preserving our democracy. But I wonder if those aspects require some focused attention and legislation just to sort of undo those voter nullification aspects of many of these state laws.
Well, yes, they require attention, and yes, they have to be undone. But who's going to do that? That's not happening, and it's deeply frustrating because, as Matt said, these are in many ways the worst aspects of these voter suppression laws, because they set up the circumstances under which a vote can essentially be nullified or overturned by a partisan election official or a partisan state legislature, which is just outrageous. And I'm kind of depressed about all this, because I fear this may have to be tested in the courts. It may have to be the Justice Department that under what's left of the Voting Rights Act and other federal legislation, has to take these states to court and see if they can get some favorable court rulings against what is clearly an assault on our democracy. Because I'm not as optimistic as I would like to be that the Senate is going to move on either HR S1 or S4 or any of these voting rights bills that need to be passed. I'm just not very optimistic about that right now.
So, Claire, we're left to understand that Joe Manchin and others, you've made clear it's not just him, care more about the filibuster than our democracy. What happens next?
Well, I'm not sure I'd put it that way. I don't think they care more about the filibuster than democracy, but I do think that we don't have enough Democratic senators right now. Joe Manchin has way too much power because we only have 50. So I think, am I worried about the next set of elections if these laws are not struck down in the courts, which, building on what Eugene just said, I think they will, many of them, be struck down in the courts. And lawsuits are being filed every day. I mean, Mark Elias and his large group of lawyers have spread out all over the country. And really what we're talking about today that is really important, which is the most nefarious part, it's not their efforts to keep you from casting your vote that I'm most worried about. It's their efforts to undermine counting your vote. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. Now, ironically, what they're doing is they're taking away the constitutional powers of elected officials. And those elected officials, many of them are Republicans. So it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. Are the secretaries of state across the country not going to protest when their legislature says, by the way, we're going to completely take away all your power? I think that remains to be seen. And one more time for the people in the back, I don't think there's long-term success for any party whose driving policy is let's make sure you can't cast a vote. And if you do, let's make sure we decide whether it counts.